So I've got a little poem, which is very close to sort of what the story's about. So I'll tell you a bit about the story and where it's come from. At the start of the week, I didn't have any requests apart from the lidless teapot and the floor that you'd said the other day. So I sort of put out, has anyone got anything more? And then a whole lot of different things came in on different messaging services. So people weren't seeing what each other were saying,
okay.
but were all suggesting. So I got some fairly interesting combination. So the first thing that I got back was Jane, who sent me this random prompt that says, looks at newspaper on table in front of themselves, 10th of the 10th, 1918. Thinks to self, it's 100 years ago. Why is there a black cat staring right at me and where am I?
Oh, beautiful.
Then I had a request to include a maze. And then I had the whole house sitting thread. And stuff that goes wrong in houses. And then that was about it, but it sort of seemed like to put those together, I was going to get this real sort of Alice in Wonderland, strange mixture of things. So this is a poem called Oak and Ink that goes with the story. Stay quiet, don't move. A new place awaits beyond your eyelids. Listen, still. The creaking of the nail joint speaks. A hushed rustle in dry petals, a scent of sandalwood and rose. Thrumming of brass sheen and a hint of copper and polish. Where did the ink flow? Around the brass base, when the desk jolted, the tea spilt, the bottle tipped. Ink in the tea stains, tails in the wood grain, seeped in despite the scrubbing. Rust and chink betray a bunch of keys, secrets of the locks they fit, left unchecked to spring alive and grow stories of their own. So now, open your eyes. Where will you go?
Oh, wow.
So, I just want to show again, for the sake of the recording, where I'm getting my tea from, which is the lidless teapot. That inspired that particular request, and I have a very nice cup, thanks to my ex-work colleagues, with Darjeeling in it.
Beautiful.
So we're all set. Have you got some tea?
Yes,
oh, yes.
I've got.
Very good. Cups.
I've got Ban Char.
Cups that shall
Barry has English breakfast.
This story is called The Undercroft House, and it's a strange, whimsical kind of a thing.
Cute.
Sammy and Ash Undercroft had a house full of daydreams. That's what Max always told other people. Being asked to house sit there was both a dream come true and very intimidating. And true to his fears, here he was, 4 hours into his stay, looking at half of a beautiful handcrafted ceramic platter sitting on the table. The other half had been hit by a projectile spice jar flying from the top of the wonderfully deep, dark spice cupboard, where there were home-dried herbs and spices Max had never heard of, in all shapes, sizes and scents. The other half of the platter was now lying in pieces at his feet. There were 2 downsides to the delightful smelling cavernous storage space that was the spice cupboard. The first being that while cavernous was not an exaggeration, and you could never possibly learn what was at the back in a lifetime of sorting, the Undercroft's collection of herbs and spices didn't seem to fit, hence the projectile jar. The second was that the floor on the side of the kitchen where the spice cupboard stood sloped quite distinctly towards the window on the adjacent wall, so the kitchen dresser, in which the spice cupboard was the topmost door, leaned to the left. This meant that the jars tended to pile up on the left-hand side of the cupboard, adding to their inclination to transform into projectiles when unsuspecting visitors attempted to get down the salt. Many attempts had evidently been made to level the dresser, as evidenced by a stack of magazines, small books and leaflets in varying stages of yellowing that were shoved under the legs on the left-hand side. The kitchen dresser, however, simply refused to be tamed in such a way, and had sunk several millimetres into these ancient pages. Max sighed and wondered whether his situation would get better or worse if he tried opening the cupboard under the sink to get the dustpan. Sage, the Undercroft's sleek black cat, who had fled at the crash of glass hitting ceramic, reappeared in the doorway, an accusing glint in her yellow-green eyes. I know, said Max, gingerly opening the necessary door and fishing around for the dustpan amongst the Tupperware. Sage approached and sniffed at the ceramic shards as Max attempted to sweep them up and into a cardboard box. Well, I might be able to repair it if I keep them, he told her, in answer to a reproachful glare. Sage let out a wailing meow that Max found a little upsetting, and he realised that her distaste was probably due to him not yet having opened the can of tuna he'd got down for her dinner. After a long and surprisingly tiring drawer-searching episode, Max found what he supposed must be the can opener, made several unsuccessful attempts at opening the can to further wails of distress from the cat, and had to text Sammy for instructions. When Sage was at last pushing the fish around her plate, which slid about noisily on the slate floor, Max added salt to his pasta and retired to the living room to eat, and pondered the review he was writing of a local theatre group's modern adaptation of A Midsummer Night's Dream. The cursor blinked on the screen of his tablet as he found his attention drawn yet again to the fascinating collection of objects on the mantelpiece. There were things sitting there that felt as if they belonged in another era entirely. A tiny vase of tarnished metal that could have held exactly one rose stem, or was it for a pen? Strange weights, absurdly balanced marbles, feathers in a basket. And that thing that had struck him the first time he'd ever visited. A teapot with no lid on. It was such a simple thing. He guessed it had been replaced with a lidded one in the kitchen and placed here to... what? He'd instinctively looked inside it the first time, expecting to find the spare key or lost odds and ends, or perhaps some kind of creature, mundane or mythical, using it as a house. But it was empty. Max washed his dish very carefully and put it on the sink as close to the wall as possible to dry, while Sage battered around a bouncy rubber bowl, much to Max's trepidation. Then, gratefully, incident-free, he took a cup of tea and his tablet back to the living room to work. Sage promptly lost interest in her bowl and left it rolling across Max's path to the couch so that he almost stepped on it, but he managed to catch himself on the antique-looking desk that was now serving as a coffee table. Catching his breath, he put down his tea and picked up the bowl in his free hand. "Watch it," he told the cat crossly, putting the bowl beside him on the couch out of harm's way. Sitting back in the chair, Max sipped his tea and forced himself to think back to the play. It had been an interesting take, with the fairy king and queen as weather readers, whose forecasts evidently, unlike most, came true due to their magic. Sage jumped up onto Max's lap and fell asleep heavily, preventing any plans of getting to bed any time soon. Max patted her absent-mindedly, looking again at that strange shelf. Some time later, he opened his eyes. He must have slept here in the chair, because rich, buttery sunlight flowed in through the lace curtain. On the edge of hearing, he noticed a movement elsewhere in the house, and stood up suddenly, making himself light-headed. "Sage, is that you running round again?" The cat appeared in the doorway and stared at him in that disconcerting way she had. Just then, though, Max noticed that his hands felt sticky, and looked down to find that they were splotchy with a thick, black, oily substance. He stared, and then sniffed at it. The scent reminded him of times before tablets and laptops, when he'd chewed the ends of countless biros. Ink. How? He looked slowly around the room for the source. On the old desk lay a newspaper. He was sure that hadn't been there earlier. Slowly he moved around in front of the desk and stood looking down at it, feeling the slow, heavy tug of his body still being half asleep. The headline looked funny. What was it about it? He peered closer. A black and white headline image? They sure were cutting printing costs. Then he saw the date. Today's, he thought, if he'd not lost track of the week. And then the year. 1918. Slowly, Max looked around the room again. The newspaper wasn't the only thing that had changed. Where he'd been sitting, there was no more slightly out-of-place IKEA couch, but instead a rocking chair with rich-looking embroidered cushions. A fireplace gaped at him where the TV had been. Again, the sound of movement from down the hallway. Max looked back at Sage. "What?" he said. But Sage just gave him a dismissive sniff and wandered off towards the kitchen. Max stood for a moment looking from his ink-splattered fingers to the newspaper, and then followed. Coming down the hallway, he glimpsed movement ahead in the kitchen, and a woman in a very uniform sort of apron bent down to place a saucer of milk in front of Sage. Max approached cautiously. "Hello? Excuse me? Ma'am? I think I must be lost." There was no apparent response from the woman, who returned to a large wooden table and began chopping onions. A younger lady, cheeks flushed as though she might have just been out in a chilly wind, appeared behind the aproned woman with a basket full of apples. "Hello," called Max, standing in the kitchen doorway now. But the two women seemed not to notice him at all. He leaned against the doorframe, off balance. That was when he noticed a crackle of paper from his pocket. He stepped back and reached inside his jeans to grasp the slip that had wrapped itself around his keys and drew it out, perplexed. There was just one word among the ink stains. It said, "Tomorrow." Giving up on anyone being able to see him, Max put the piece of paper back where he'd found it and wandered towards the back door. He could see crackling fireplaces in the master bedroom and little front sitting room, where the remains of some breakfast sat on a table. A couple stood chatting, looking out of the window, but again, they didn't pay Max any attention as he passed. Max went outside. Immediately his nose was assailed by pollen, and he sneezed 5 times before he could properly see what was in front of him. When Max was able to look, he saw that a short stretch of lawn was bounded by a tall, thickly flowering hedge of gorse, and a narrow opening in the hedge beckoned. Beginning to see little point in questioning, Max went through. He walked a long way down a path bounded by more gorse hedges, before the predicament became evident. This was a maze, and Max, quite famously among his peers, had absolutely no sense of direction. He spun, panicking, thinking he would go back, but where he expected to see the gap he'd walked through, he now only saw more hedges. Slowly, Max turned back to face the long path he'd been following, and seeing no alternative, he kept walking. It was a beautiful walk, but the longer Max continued, the more anxious he felt that the maze might in fact be endless, and the more he sneezed. He wanted a cup of tea. Just as Max was thinking he might as well sit down and rest, at least, he saw a figure ahead of him, snipping at the hedges with secateurs. Having little hope by now that the figure would be able to see him, Max approached out of curiosity alone, wondering whether all these magnificent hedges were cut by hand. When Max came close, The gardener turned to look at him, with a smiling, sun-soaked, androgynous kind of face that seemed, unlike the people indoors, to see him. "Hello, Max," said the gardener. Max jumped in shock and hurt his neck. "I suppose you're lost, aren't you?" the smiling individual continued, a chuckle in their voice. "I keep telling you, the labyrinth is very easy. You just need to follow the slopes." They adjusted a straw sun hat and leaned down to pick something up. Looking down, Max saw that bright gorse flowers were piled high in a basket near his foot, and he realized that his new ally was cutting flowers to bring inside. The newly cut blooms, however, gave him another sneezing fit, and when he looked up again, Max found the friendly figure had already left. What had they meant, follow the slopes? Max turned in slow circles, wondering which way the slopes led. He drew himself up as tall as he could go, hoping to see between the blossoming new growth and spy the gardener leaving. But Max wasn't very tall, and the hedges weren't very high, and he could see nothing. As he slumped back down, however, Max felt something bounce in his jacket pocket. Some kind of weight. He felt his side, perplexed, and found something round. Sage's bowl. He pulled it out and knelt down on the stony path. This had better work. He let go of the ball. It travelled easily off along the way he'd been going and turned left. Max had to run to catch up and avoid losing sight of it as it rolled rapidly onwards, turning this way and that, until it rolled out onto the side lawn, and Max stumbled to a halt in the dust. Sage was sitting there on the grass, staring at him again, eyeing her bowl as if to ask what on earth he was doing chasing it instead of her. Max picked it up. "Shut up," he told her. When he straightened up, Max caught a glimpse through the side window of the straw hat worn by the gardener. He scrambled up onto the veranda and hurried inside just in time to see them drop something into nothing other than the teapot with no lid. It wasn't polite, but Max had to know. He dashed inside, picked up the teapot and pulled out a piece of paper. It said, "When for the strawberry fields," and was signed with only a heart. Max hurriedly put it back and went into the hallway, where he wondered what to do for a few moments. Presently, the younger woman from the kitchen appeared, hurried straight past Max and pulled the note out of the teapot. She smiled, pocketed it, and looking about, slipped over to the desk, in what Max knew as the living room, but which, he noticed now, was rather more full of books than he remembered. Suddenly there was a shout from the kitchen, and the aproned woman strode out, untying her apron as she did so and bundling it up in her hand. "Olivia!" She looked up and down the hall. "Where are you? We have to go now." She spotted the door ajar. "Olivia, you can't be going in the study and looking at your father's papers. We're late. Get out of there and get your coat." There was a crash and a muffled expletive that made the older woman say, "Olivia!" again, and the young woman appeared, looking dejected. "I don't even really want to go to Miss Emma's high tea. Why can't we stay home and have our own tea and read?" The older woman sighed at her and pushed her along the hallway by the elbow. Sage raced down the hallway behind them, attacking their ankles. "Put that cat outside," called the aproned woman to no one in particular. Max slid through the door into the living room cum study. On the desk, an ink bottle was tipped over and dripping onto the floor, and a waiting scrap of paper had only one small horizontal line on it, followed by a big splodge where Olivia had obviously bumped the desk to one side. Max heard the front door close behind the two women, Olivia still complaining that she wanted to read and didn't the apples need picking tonight, and an array of other inventive excuses, including a sudden earache. Max looked at the line on the paper. He was fairly sure it could only be one letter, and that must mean he knew what it was meant to say. He reached into his jeans pocket and pulled forth the scrap of paper he'd discovered earlier. Tomorrow. He went over to the mantelpiece, and after a moment's uncertainty slipped the note into the empty teapot. Max could hear the ink still dripping onto the floor in the study. Plink, plink, and then it started to sound more like plop, plop, and then Max opened his eyes and smelt the smell. Oh no. Sage! He leapt up from the couch and raced out to the hallway, where sure enough, Sage was just finishing dropping a puddle of unpleasantly soft poop onto the floor. Why didn't you wake me up? Seethed Max. Meow, Sage replied. Max finished cleaning the floor at 11:30, took out the bin bags, left Sage outside to have a think about her actions, and stood, exhausted, back in the hallway, looking around at this big old house full of mysteries that didn't belong to him. He couldn't resist going to the living room mantelpiece and putting his hand inside the teapot without a lid. But all that was in there was some dusty residue that made Max sneeze. Perhaps it's the dust of dried gorse blossoms, he thought, and then kicked himself for being so sentimental. He picked up the strange little lidless teapot and turned it over in his hands. A roughness on the base drew his attention, and he held it to the light. Scratched into the ceramic, roughly as though with a pocket knife, was O&A 1918, surrounded by a heart in the way of teenagers across the centuries. A coincidence? Max brushed the dust off the teapot and put it back in its place. He scooped his tablet up off the couch and typed in the first line for the review he would now have to write in the morning. Places sometimes seem to have memories. And so it is in the small town theatre, where the Wheat Sheaf Company brought to life a modern version of a tale that has certainly been told in that place many times over the centuries. Then he locked the screen, plugged the tablet into charge, and feeling that his day had been very, very long indeed, Max went to bed.
Beautiful. Oh, that was gorgeous. It's a lovely story.
It's a Doctor Who story.
It is a bit of a Doctor Who story.
It's a Doctor Who story. Oh, that's lovely. I like the introduction of the pooping cat.
Well, yeah, Emily's stories, she didn't find them very funny, but I thought, the things that happen house sitting, the mishaps, are quite good. And I thought that way it starts and ends with a house sitting mishap.
Yeah. Ah, it's lovely. And they're just magnificent. What was the thing that made me go, oh, did Charmaine comment about our spice cupboard? Did Charmaine comment about our spice cupboard?
No. I was thinking of the Grattan Street spice rack that used to be above the stove, and that was really high and really huge, and then I sort of combined that image with other cupboards at Grattan Street that were built by Grandpa and seemingly bottomless.
Yes. Well, he did. He made enormous things, industrial-sized, everything. A clothes basket for laundry, waiting, washing, that you basically had to climb in to get the stuff from the bottom out because it was so deep.
I remember that wicker thing,
Yeah. No, there was a deeper one. He made one, which was about a metre by a metre.
Right, so you could get in. You could fall in when you were trying and be sucked into a portal.
Yes, it would be
the sort of things.
An excellent hiding place, so yeah. I like the maze solution. Actually, all mazes have slopes out. That would be great.
But normally, if you rolled something on the ground in the maze, it would probably go through the hedge.
It would. But that's right.
The suggestion is kind of that every floor or path or whatever at the property is not flat. So things will go a certain way if you let them go. Yeah,
that's so they slope in two directions like the Grattan Street.
Yeah.
Does.
So the ball will stay sort of with
It reminds me of, do you know that children's game where you have silver ball in
you
them?
have to try and get it into the particular spot.
Yeah.
I used to like those.
Yeah.
It is like
and
that.
The sloping floor in the cupboard was distinctly Toby Cottage.
Yes.
Because I remember lying in bed and looking at it and going, oh, that cupboard's not straight, because it was like this. It was like really distinctly on a slant. And then we went, it's the floor. The floor is not straight. And then we went, the walls aren't straight. Oh, the ceiling's not straight. It was a real gingerbread house. It was amazing, wasn't it?
Wow.
But so charming.
Yeah, really cute.
And strong, no hint that...
there are a few places we stayed in that kind of combined with the image of what Grattan Street is like and what your place is like to an extent to form my picture of what this house that he was looking after was like. Some of them... I think Toby Cottage did have slate floors that weren't very true, and so did the farmhouse we stayed in. And sort of strange things in jars that the people had dried themselves and stuff, which Grandma and Pa also had, didn't they?
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah.
Originally they probably had labels.
Yes. But then
the
wrong thing got put in the jar next time and the labels became irrelevant. And
fade and peel off and so you have this sort of unidentified dried substance in the herbs and you never be like,
what is that? Is this for eating or?
And it may not have been for eating. That's the trouble.
Well, it probably would have been if it was
trick rats.
Well, my dad used to keep also lots of powders and things that were to be used for machinery and
in jars.
In jars,
but not in the kitchen usually.
Not in the kitchen.
Although there's occasionally things that turned up on the windowsill that may or may not have been edible.
And really, in the end, we had to put quite a lot of things in the bin, didn't we? Because they were
don't know what they are.
Unidentifiable.
Had enough open that.
Nice.
This one, the sort of planning wasn't as big as last time, and I sort of thought when I got to the end of it, I probably should have looked at lots of pictures or whatever from 1918, because my concept of what was 1918 like as, a household operating was fairly vague. I looked up what sort of pens did they have, as to like, was it a pen? Did it have ink? And yes, it was a dip pen, like a fountain pen. So that worked with the ink on the hands. I drew sort of lines going everywhere on my page. And that's like, the topics up the top and then how are all of these going to come together at the bottom. The original, the top of the page says, getting lost in mazes, teapot with no lid, sloped floors, sense of direction, waking up to see the newspaper dated 100 years ago, house-sitting dramas, ink on my hands. And I have in brackets you never saw, which was relevant. They're not overt, because none of them ever questioned why. The ink was on Max's hands, and neither did Max in the end.
No.
So there's a strange very Doctor Who thing about it, because the spilt ink didn't happen until after he already had the ink on his hands, and he had the note, but the note hadn't been written. I know, that was nice. I loved that. I thought that was lovely. But, The original solution to the maze was that the teapot with no lid got put on a little skateboard, and that was what rolled down the slope to go all the way up the maze. But I thought, it would get broken in that situation, and it wouldn't be. So I introduced the Sage's rubber ball just for that purpose, because I thought that'd get the cat in the way a bit more and keep the cat involved in the story. And
when the thing happened about about the time thing, I was expecting an explanation of how the lid got broken. The teapot lid
right.
broken or thing, yeah. So,
yeah.
But that was like a, like red herring thing for me. Yeah, that's all I was expecting. I was going to say in 1918, the likely expletive of somebody in a fairly reasonable sort of house would have, pretty mild.
A bit like the Worcester ones, maybe?
Yes. Oh, blistering,
What does he call people?
He calls them a blister or an egg.
Blister, he's got... What does he say in front of his aunt who gets told off? Can't remember.
No, I don't know. But
anyway.
Dratting
yes. Flies or something, yeah. yeah. So Olivia probably said darn or something like that,
Oh, well, even darn and certainly damn would have been considered.
Damn would have been very bad.
Shocking.
Well, maybe she did, yeah. She's meant to come across a bit like... Actually, the inspiration for Olivia, not in, like, manner and, what's going on in her life, but was the daughter in Upstart Crow, who's very much like your teenager of all generations kind of thing, but in a completely different era.
She's magnificent.
But so before I turn the recording off, the next story time will be... There we go. The calendar. Yes, I've noticed it.
We've been out in the sun.
It will be the 10th of November.
Right.
Yes. Any immediate requests or thoughts about?
Yes, this one I tried to send you. And it won't go.
Oh, it won't go?
And I've tried to send it twice and I don't get it.
I had a message from you with something.
Yeah, I did have something.
There was something you did send me. What was that in the Storytime one?
View from the rooftops.
View from the rooftops.
Or moss on the roof. Do you remember that amazing roof we saw?
Oh, that was a wonderful roof, and I've got a picture of it that I can work from.
Absolutely
big, thick
gorgeous.
moss that was like eating the roof, and it was like wooden scale. What do you call that?
Shingles.
Shingles. And it was in... What is that place called? Ambleside? In the Lakes District. And it was a little like boat hut down by the water, and it was just, really...
Yeah, it was stunning. I'll try and...
Well, anyway, I can draw some inspiration from when I used to get on the roof of the carport amongst the creek.
Well, that's right. And I mean, I was think of all those, like, you had a lot of attic type rooms.
Oh, I did, and I like those. Yeah.
The rooftops and the pot, like all those gorgeous chimney, clay chimney pots, and you get a sense of, I don't know, personal connection with other people, because you can kind of see the little lives encapsulated sort of thing, which I think is quite interesting. So that was one thing. Also, we saw hot air balloons twice, I think.
That's true, we did. That was interesting.
Attic rooms, which was really interesting. Now, the other one, which comes from your place, is this line: you can't make people like Henriette. And I was talking to Barry about it. It's more than just making people like Henriette. Like, if you think about Henriette, one of the things you said is, yes, I agree with using everything. If you're going to kill an animal, good. You should use all the bits of the animal you can, or whatever. And you can argue that, you can kind of rationalise it to yourself, like, I should like this because it's resourceful and it's economical and it's saving, things. But you don't like it because it smells vile and it just doesn't appeal to you. Whereas Lloyd thinks it's okay, and Fabrice presumably actually likes it because he was brought up on it or whatever. but you can't make people like things, even if the reason behind them is really good. And so you can have a lot of fun with trying to make people like things that just don't appeal.
Yeah.
But it's actually quite serious, because sometimes, you know, we just have an aversion to something.
Yeah.
Or something doesn't appeal, and there's no
with something like force feeding somebody something that, you know, realism gag or whatever is a torture-like thing to do, isn't it?
That's right. And you know, just, you know, for example, humour or
people don't share the same.
If they don't think it's funny, they don't think it's funny.
Yeah.
And, you know, different kinds of music, everything. You know,
you can't make people like heavy metal if they don't.
No. Oh, that's because they were brought up on it, or they were used to it, or whatever it is. But sometimes that doesn't matter. You still just don't like it. Not always about exposure. Sometimes it's just a gut thing.
Right. Because Dad wanted to have like a losing teams type one at some point. So I wonder whether I could have you can't make people like football, or you can't make people like cricket or whatever. You know, a bit like the whole thing where Father Ted's trying to make Mrs. Doyle understand why football's great. Well, she does get converted, of course.
Of course.
But, you know, can you convert people to enjoy sport who don't?
That's
and as
right.
part of that, you know, the losing teams thing.